I would like to take the opportunity to thank EDC for sponsoring the lunch, and as well as the LGBT Business Exporter of the Year Award, as well as to Kellogg Company for sponsoring our annual Supplier Diversity Awards. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the next session presented by BDC. The session will look at the challenges and opportunities businesses face in developing and implementing a strategy for scaling their business. Our moderator for the session is Victoria Lennox, the co-founder, president, and former CEO of Startup Canada. Joining Victoria, we have an impressive roster of panelists. Terry Mann, Vice President, Financing, BDC. Jennifer Cook, Corporate Lead, National. Women in Trade, EDC. Katrina McKay, founder and CEO of Up-Level Solutions. And finally, Peter Hawkins, Manager Director, Miller Logistics. So, please, well, you're already on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? Good? Yeah? What an inspiring event this has been, and thank you so much for joining this session all about scaling up. We're going to be speaking about how to scale up a company, what the difference is between scaling up and actually growing a company. But just for a raise of hands, how many folks in the room are in startup mode? You're just establishing your business. You're just starting up and you're exploring your options. And how many people are growing a business or operating a business? You're just holding steady. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm on a ride. Scaling up is not quite there, but you're just focused on survival at the moment. Yeah? And how many of you are really thinking about opportunities to grow and scale your company? Yeah? That's great. It's a fantastic mix. And what I love so much about community and networks like this is that it really is about peer learning. And that's what we're doing here today. We're learning from one another, and we're learning from all of the support of the ecosystem. So my name is Victoria Lennox. I'm the co-founder and president of an organization called Startup Canada, and we're so proud to be supporting today. I'm going to just go very quickly through each of our fantastic panelists and allow them to introduce themselves and how they're going to be approaching this panel. And then we're going to get through the questions, which are very great questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. And what I want you to do, for the people who are starting up, I really want you to think through, what can I derive from this panel that's going to help me to take it to the next level? For the people who are in survival mode or operating mode, who are just staying steady, really think through how you can leverage this panel to scale or to sustain yourselves better. And for those scaling up, make sure you get every ounce of what you want from this panel, because it's such an opportunity we have in front of us to learn from one another. And then, of course, when we do Q&A, I also love to throw it up to see if you have any further advice for entrepreneurs on this topic of scaling. So we'll start with our first panelist. So we'll start with Terry from the Business Development Bank of Canada. Terry, if you want to introduce yourself.
Certainly, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I am Terry Mann. I am our Vice President Financing at BDC here in Toronto. And I've also spent the last 5 years actually working in our advisory services team. BDC has a full range of financing and advisory services solutions, and every year we work with thousands of entrepreneurs to see how we can support them, help them plug any gaps they have in the business, and see what we can do certainly around scale up and the challenges they may face. So I'm very happy to be here with you and have an opportunity to share my perspective.
Can I get a sense of how many people already work with BDC in the audience or have interacted with the... Awesome. And how many intend to after this? Okay, beautiful. Okay, perfect. Now I want to talk about scaling up. We're also thinking about going global. So we have here Jennifer Cook from EDC, who's leading the way here. So Jennifer, if you want to introduce yourself.
Great, thanks Victoria. Hi again, everybody. I sort of did a little intro blurb there at lunch, but my role at EDC has evolved. For the last 9 years, have worked directly with Canadian entrepreneurs, trying to bring EDC services to help Canadian companies start and grow through exporting. Today, I'm leading EDC's national strategy for increasing the number of women-owned, women-led, and of course, diverse-led companies across Canada. We recognize the need for differentiated service, to differentiated market segments. And so we want to help more companies that are in those diverse segments and underserved segments to grow and leverage EDC solutions to help you do that.
That's great. And a show of hands, how many people have interacted with EDC or work with EDC? How many people intend to go global and to leverage the support? Perhaps more following this panel. So now on to our entrepreneurs. So Katrina, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Katrina McKay. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Uplevel Solutions. I love being here because we actually have a social focus as well. We do virtual assistant services, so administrative services, maybe one of the unsexiest things you could talk about, I suppose, but essential as you are growing a business. We're also very much in scale-up stage ourselves, so I'm delighted to share some of the war stories, really, from my perspective, and hopefully some of you can benefit from my mistakes. And we primarily work with entrepreneurs and with small and medium-sized businesses, and so we get to see a lot of the behind the scenes from companies of all sizes as they continue to grow their companies. So that's what we do. And our social enterprise focus is that all of the administrative work is actually done by our team that we train and recruit ourselves. And they're based in the Philippines and newly Haiti, and we look to hire primarily women and LGBT identified folks. So delighted to be in this room, delighted to have been invited, and I've already heard so many of your stories, and excited to add to the dialogue.
That's awesome, Katrina. And Peter, over to you.
So I'm Peter Hawkins, and I am the Managing Director, which is a title I gave myself, for Mellowhawk Logistics. We're a freight forwarder, and a freight forwarder is a travel agent for cargo. We don't own anything, but we can move anything anywhere, and we have licenses for dangerous goods and dangerous chemicals and things like that. I actually got involved because my husband was interested in this, and I was 40 years old and didn't have a job. I worked in publishing. So the first time I heard about a freight forwarder, I owned one. So from there, I had a tough time learning everything. So one thing that I want you all to understand here, actually two things. First of all, it's all about connections. It's all about who you're going to meet here and what story you're going to hear, and really take advantage of that, because the people I have met through the few years that I've been involved with the CGLCC have been tremendously beneficial to me, even at my late stage in life. And the other thing I want to stress too is you can't start soon enough. So if you are in a startup position, you should be thinking about BDC. If you're thinking about expanding across any border, think about EDC. Talk to those people now, because they can really help, along with the banks that are here, EY that's here, all the wonderful organizations that are here. You have a really good opportunity. Please take advantage of it.
Yeah, I always say you need to know who you need to know before you need to know them.
Start asking. You won't know. Just ask.
Absolutely. And so maybe we could just kick it off with you, Peter, and the panel. We talk about scaling and growth and differentiating between scaling and growth. What's the difference for you between scaling up and growing up? And maybe you can paint a picture around how you scaled up and moved forward.
I'm happy to answer that question, but you're going to find out that Ms. McKay here has got a better answer.
Oh, I don't know about that. This is going to be building answers, maybe.
So for us, growing is, of course, gaining more clients, trying to incrementally grow our business, and to bring more revenue in and spend as little as possible when we do it. And in that process, we're going to be hiring more staff, in our case, of course, getting more trade lanes, handling more countries. Scaling is being prepared to handle that business, planning for the growth in business. So for us, for instance, if somebody comes to us and we've been doing regional accounts and suddenly we have a national or multinational account, can I ship their product to as many countries as possible? Do I have to take advantage of it before I need it? So it's about planning for us.
I love it. I think that's a great answer. I'd love to add to it as well. I think startup energy and when you're working at a startup or you're starting something of your own, that's really about figuring out what the model is, right? Figuring out what you're going to sell, how you're going to sell it, and experimenting and figuring out your marketing strategy, your go-to-market strategy. It's making those mistakes. It's not to say that you wouldn't make mistakes, and I mean, everybody makes mistakes all the way along the way when you get into that scale-up stage. But once you get into scale-up, it's about, okay, we know what our business model is, we know what we can deliver and what we do well, and now we're going to lean in. We're going to do more of it, we're going to do it faster, we're going to continue to grow. So I think growth is essential at all stages of business, right? We should all be talking about growth if we're in business, but scale-up energy is a little bit different, and growth for a scale-up, scaling up, is really about saying, okay, what is my lane, and how do I stay the hell in it? I love the fact that we're talking about expansion into other areas, into other geographies. There was a lot of talk yesterday about how can we add more services, how can we add new things, more things, and I think that's great, but I think in a scale-up with scale-up energy, you have to balance the desire for a brand new shiny thing that may add more business, and here's what I know my business does well, how do we get bigger doing what it is we do best? And that would be my definition of scaling up versus starting up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear before we move on, how did you know it was that you wanted to scale and not just grow? Like, what was it? What was your turning point that says, I think I'm ready to scale up? Because we know that scaling up is not for every entrepreneur, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But when was that moment? When was that, aha, we got to get serious about scaling?
I think for us, it's really a matter of saying, when you start to look at the dollars and cents and you really start to look at those line items, you look at what's possible, right? What are the next opportunities, and how do you weigh those against what you're currently doing? And you start saying, you know what, it's a lot more profitable to say no to the new things than to just say yes to all the shiny new things. I think that's where you start to go, okay, we're onto a really good thing here, and now we need to lean in. I think it's a very practical decision. I think it's a tough thing for founders, especially for visionaries, to be able to check yourself and say, okay, but where's the money actually coming from? Where is my market? Where are we already doing well? So I think once you have an idea of what it is you're doing really well, and what your core competency is as a company, that's where it actually becomes quite clear, I believe. I think that there's a lot of discussion around, I don't know if we should be scaling up at this stage or not, but I think that when you get to that point, it almost becomes painfully obvious, or at least that was our story, and that's what we're seeing from a lot of the companies we work with.
But that fit with you as an entrepreneur. You wanted to scale. You had an aptitude to scale. Well, not every entrepreneur wants to scale up.
Or has to.
Or has to scale up. So what about you, Peter? When was that moment?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because that vocabulary is not even in our system, and it's something I had to Google before we came on stage. And the fact is, we do it, and I didn't know that we did it. What we found was we were growing our business until we couldn't grow anymore because we didn't have the financing to take the next step. And once we were able to establish financing and get better advice, and we actually had to hire consultants to help us, because as entrepreneurs you just bulldoze in, you have your sleepless night, you argue, you complain, sex dies, and then eventually your business grows. And we hit this wall, and once we hit the wall, we realized that financing was the issue, and that allowed us to grow into new lanes and to provide a wider breadth of services. Actually, something else that was very interesting, we had scaled up, and I didn't even know it, because we always said we were selling 3 products, and then we actually had some BDC consultants come in and point out we were actually selling 13 products. We just weren't charging for 10. So it was a nice improvement in our bottom line to learn to charge for 10 more products.
Yeah, well, scaling comes with surrounding yourself with the right ecosystem and the right players. And so there's different approaches to scaling. There's not just one right way to scale, but certainly partnerships help you to scale faster. So what are some of the approaches for Jennifer and Terry? What are some of the approaches to scaling? And can you share how your organizations support entrepreneurs to scale through advice, financing, risk mitigation, and opening up opportunities to scale up when you know it's right to do so?
Sure. So a lot of really good perspective, and it's tough to follow entrepreneurs on these panels because they're always very dynamic. I think when we talk about growth versus scale up, it's for sure that growth is a critical part of scaling, particularly for newer stage companies who need sufficient revenue to fund their growth and to continue what they're trying to achieve. And I think when we look at where growth is coming from, it's so important, and Katrina talks about go-to-market strategies, it's so important to identify who are the right clients who will support my vision long term. And I think we've seen lots of entrepreneurs who, pursue growth at all costs, and sometimes that does come with many, many costs. So certainly targeting who you want to sell your product or your service to, and understanding if you have built the processes and efficiencies into your system so that can be controlled, knowing what all your products are and what do I know the financials of my business well enough to understand what I can exploit to do this in a way that is effective but is efficient at the same time. And the other piece is really around, do I have the management capabilities to do it? Because most entrepreneurs, when they start a business, they don't do it because they're passionate about writing human resource policy manuals. They do it because they're passionate about their product or their service or what they're offering. And I think Peter had a really good point about bringing people in and engaging them to fill in some of those gaps, certainly before you can maybe expand your management team and build all the staff you want to. Certainly we've done a lot of work in that space to figure out which part of the business needs to be tightened so that you are poised to manage that growth as it comes.
So when working with BDC, if a company is like, okay, it's time to scale, we want to have BDC as a partner, do you lean in with advisory services pre-financing, or would you want them to come and talk to you about financing before, looking deeply into various aspects of their company?
I think it depends. So often entrepreneurs come to BDC because they want financing, and we've got the money, you can do that, that's no problem. But typically what we will do with an entrepreneur that we're meeting for the first time is have a really great conversation about the whole business model. So what is it you're doing? Where's your revenue coming from? What are your channels? What are your supplier relationships like? And we'll go through all of it so that it's not just about the project at hand, but it's about that long-term kind of growth and success for the company. And I think that's a really important part. So it depends on the project itself and where they are, but we will often look at both at the same time.
I know with EDC, we think export development in Canada, we have to move stuff, but business is changing, and business is about international expansion, foreign direct investment, opening up satellite offices, global talent acquisition. So Jennifer, can you explain a bit about how entrepreneurs can work with EDC, and then how you support growth and scale-up plans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. Thanks, Victoria. I think, when I think about growth versus scale-up, of course, growth is always an exciting time for a company. You're trying to achieve larger revenues. At the same time, you're generally increasing your costs to support those revenues. When we start talking about scaling a business, that's really, at least the way I look at it, is how do you exponentially grow your revenues without necessarily increasing your costs at the same level. It's taking your business to the next level. And there's a couple different ways of doing that. Often when a business gets to a point where they can start standardizing or optimizing, as Terry was mentioning, certain processes so that you keep your costs low. But oftentimes, what we try and encourage Canadian companies to do is to look beyond the domestic market, which has its limits. We live in a fairly small economy. So as you start looking beyond our borders, the minister said it yesterday, even in just the countries where we have free trade agreements, there's 1.5 billion potential customers out there for you. So as you start looking beyond borders, you really have an opportunity to increase your number of customers, and contracts tend to be much, much larger. So you can increase your revenues and hopefully without increasing your costs so much, because one customer can give you a much bigger order. And that can present challenges for companies. You need financing. So one of the key things in being prepared for scale-up is to make sure that you're planning appropriately for the working capital, the financing that you will require to be able to manage that growth appropriately. When even just go to the States, contracts that companies win tend to be much larger than they're used to winning here in Canada. And so how are you going to deliver that contract? And it's being prepared for that situation. So if you come to talk to EDC, we have a bunch of tools. That's one of the challenges that companies face when they're scaling up, is that, you know what, their balance sheet doesn't necessarily support the loans that the bank is willing to give them for the requirements that they need to achieve these larger export contracts. So EDC works with all the Canadian banks. We provide loan guarantees for companies that are growing outside of Canada so that the bank can get comfortable giving you the amount of working capital that you need to actually go and deliver on those contracts that you're winning outside of Canada. We offer credit insurance, which also gives banks more comfort. It gives you a sleep at night factor when you're working with companies that are new to you and far away that you might not be as comfortable with. But it also gives the banks more comfort about the accounts receivable that you're starting to grow outside of Canada, because, you know, it's further away for them too as a source of security for the bank. So, you know, there's a lot of things to think about in scaling your business and how you want to do it. Maybe you do it with technology, maybe you do it with new distribution methods outside of Canada, but there's definitely a lot of resources to help you, and you don't have to do it alone.
And I think that's a beautiful segue into maybe discussing very practically how to use the ecosystem to scale up. So Peter, you've used the ecosystem to
I've
scale
used
up.
everybody.
Okay, tell us who you've used and how you've used them.
Sure. So I started off using my own house mortgage. Okay? I needed financing, mortgaged the house. Used that money, started putting some of that money back, but as we grew and as we started hiring people, we realized that we actually needed a better advantage, and we were able to get a line of credit from the bank. That was terrific. It wasn't until we were 10 years into the business that we realized, actually, so EDC is something we used early on too, because one thing that this Trade Protect, this particular product is that we use a lot, is if I have a client who wants $75,000 worth of credit, EDC is going to guarantee that to 90% or something like that. And so previously, I would only extend $20,000. I couldn't sleep at night knowing that somebody I could not get a hold of still owed me all that money. With EDC, it worked out beautifully, and it really helped us expand not only to more countries, but to bigger companies who, believe it or not, actually are more reliable. And so that was a very advantageous product for us. And I will tell you, one thing to EDC's credit is the constant communication. We have a lot of communication with them. Whenever something is new and something available, they make that available to us. So that is a product that we use regularly. With BDC, at the 10-year mark, we realized that we needed to, we were stagnant. We were not growing, and we needed to find a way to grow. And Shola, a rep, came in, and just a lovely guy. Actually, he sent a message to me, and he was a Rhodes Scholar. Or no, Fulbright Scholar. He's a Fulbright Scholar. And I remember the song, the Paul Simon song, when it makes the joke about the Fulbright Scholar. And so I said, okay, I hate people coming in, you can come in. And he came in and talked to us, and he had just a lovely manner, a very reasonable manner, telling his story, and we told our story, and it was a very engaging time. And then we applied for the small loan first, I think the $50,000 or whatever you can do online, and then we were able to use that, use it to our advantage, pay that down, and then he came back in and he said, well, if you actually are qualified now for this kind of loan. And we're thinking, oh, okay, well, we love you now, Shola. You can come anytime. So we did. We got the bigger loan, and he was very helpful with telling us what we needed to provide and what we needed to do and how we needed to step up. And in that, we also identified big gaps in our own knowledge. And that's when we actually took advantage of BDC Consulting. And we had 2 consultants who came in and worked with us for 3 months. And then we discovered all kinds of things about ourselves. Sometimes if you're working in your company day to day and you're just making calls and you're just trying to pay bills and you're just trying to put people who you owe money to, push them back a little bit, you don't actually see the potential in your company. And every person here is an entrepreneur with a big dream and big abilities, and sometimes you just don't know it. And these folks came in with their very wide experience and were really able to help us. It was a very, very worthwhile investment for us. And just one more, I do talk. One thing, when you talked about what comes first, the conversation or the money, we are obviously the $50,000 application went in, then the conversation, then another conversation, and then a relationship. So much better money and much better management of money comes with relationship. And now I will tell you, at BDC, I probably know 5 people that I talk to regularly.
Yeah, they essentially become part of your team, and it really is Team Canada. At Startup Canada, we have 250,000 members, and when we survey them, only 8% leverage any support from the government apart from paying their taxes every year with CRA. And so we think about, you had Minister Ng here yesterday, you think about all of the investments we're making in growing businesses and creating a more equal community for businesses. It's leveraging Team Canada to scale your company and recognizing that you can stand on the whole ecosystem to go faster. Katrina, what support did you leverage in starting up?
Great question, and very little. So I actually want to be the cautionary tale a little bit. I'm very proud of where my company has gotten to and the success that we've achieved. But I always whenever I meet with entrepreneurs, I always say, I didn't ask for the help I needed. And I would be a lot further ahead. My company would be a lot further ahead if I had of. I've spoken quite a bit about unconscious bias. And you can look it up. There's a funny little video of me online where I get myself choked up. My team still laughs at me for this because I'm talking about unconscious bias, and I'm trying to talk about it in terms of general unconscious bias, and I start talking about unconscious bias towards myself. So I look at, for example, some of my peers from whatever backgrounds they've come from, and for whatever reason, they felt more comfortable going into the BDC or going into a bank or approaching the EDC or whomever else and saying, hey, I have this great idea, I'm onto something great, help me grow it. I didn't do that until quite late, really, until the past 6 months. And what's quite funny, I think, about particularly startup culture and solopreneurs and founders of small companies is we tend to pat each other on the back a lot for bootstrapping. That's interesting. Most companies, when they grow, they need money to do so, right? So I think I've artificially actually held my company back. And it's only in recent months, really, or over the past year, that I've looked at, wow, we could go a lot further if we had the proper resources. So I would say my advice to everybody in the room is, and no matter how large or how small your company is to think about what are the resources we're lacking, and what are the questions we're afraid to ask? What are the favors or the help we're afraid to ask for? Lean in there. Because I was surrounded by people who said, great job, Katrina, you're doing such a great job, look how far you've come, because I was essentially digging this big trench with a spoon. And then no one said to me, wait a minute, you could have had that done in a day by hiring a backhoe, right? So if you're doing something like that that's similar in your company, have a hard think about that and how that aligns or doesn't with your bigger goals.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter and then Jennifer?
Sure. I can't agree with you more. It is so many times that I was protecting my little diamond of my company and not sharing the information, not getting the bookkeeping that I needed, not getting not understanding what I needed. So many times I got in the way of growth. And there's 2 of us, and so many times we got in the way of growth. And you have to remember, as an entrepreneur, yes, you are the leader, but the leader needs help, needs support. And so you need good advice, you need supportive advice, okay? So you have to be careful when you're looking at people who are supporting you and helping you in accounting or in bookkeeping or in marketing or whatever, that they're not in your way either. Okay, don't take your eye off your own company, but you do need help, and you should get it early. You really should.
Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, these are not uncommon stories, and I think it's very, very wise advice to entrepreneurs to seek help before they absolutely need it. And I think actually the BDC's got a lot of information on this, but you know, certain entrepreneurs that try and do it all themselves, they bootstrap, you know, when you go to your bank too late, you've exhausted all your resources, and then it becomes very, very difficult for a bank to finance you. So you want to go to the bank before you've exhausted everything, because the bank wants to see that you still have resources to put in if you need to. So it's sort of a lesson you don't want to learn too late, right?
Really good advice.
Yeah, in working with entrepreneurs for about 20 years now, it's always the mindset of the entrepreneur and their capacity to learn that grows and accelerates the company or holds the company back. Your business is a manifestation of you and how you invest in your own culture and your own learning, and how you open yourself to new ideas. And every time the business will stagnate when you stagnate, especially if you don't have a team around you. And they always say if you want to go far, go together. And what's great, once again, and working with jurisdictions across the world, is there's a Team Canada to lean on, which is incredible. Perhaps we can just hear some quick micro stories from BDC and EDC of some of the entrepreneurs you've worked with and how you've seen them scale up, or perhaps decide that, you know, there might be another way forward for them. So Terry, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think there's a lot of good points being made, and I think one of the things that we see a lot is entrepreneurs putting a lot of pressure on themselves to know everything and be able to do everything, and it doesn't make sense in many ways that the same person with the background they have would know everything about sales and targeting customers, and would know everything about financial management of a business, and would know all these things. And so, you know, we've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs really to help them see who their target client might be. And it's very common to hear, and I'm thinking of one entrepreneur in particular who we went to, and this is a theme. And we were starting to work with them, and we were going through some exploration to see how we could help. And what they told us, well, our product appeals to everyone. Everyone is our client. And when we dug a little bit deeper, what we figured out is because that was their belief, they were trying to reach an entire audience of consumers, which is next to impossible with the amount of noise there is online and everywhere today. And so one of the things we helped them see, which was actually kind of quite unusual in this day and age, was that instead of being everywhere, and they had done a lot of really good work on Facebook, on social media, they had a really big footprint, but the product that they made was quite specifically actually targeted to people in their late 50s, which what we helped them see is that radio could be a really interesting, and Peter, I don't know if you listen to the radio, but radio could be a really interesting medium for them, and that some of these actually traditional advertising mediums were going to get right to their target client, which they felt they were way ahead of the curve, but in fact hadn't identified who their customer was. And I think it's really important to bring people in to go through that work with you and help you see. And in realigning them and some of those things, we could make their promotional dollars go so much further and do so much more. And it's great to see.
It's a great story. Jennifer.
There's so many, Victoria. It's so hard to pick, but I guess, you know, what I try and do is to sort of demystify some of the myths about exporting. And, you know, there's so many different ways to get started. And it's really not as difficult as you think when it comes to exporting. And, you know, it makes me think of a company that I learned about just recently, actually, a company out in Vancouver. And when we talk to companies that provide services, they never think of themselves as exportable or as exporters. But if you're selling your services to companies outside of Canada, guess what? You're kind of an exporter. So there was a young woman that you know, started her business out in Vancouver in basically providing you know, a full suite of HR services. And she was very, very targeted in who she wanted to go after. She wanted to work with retailers within the Vancouver airport. And she used her network to sort of get the right to bid on an RFP, and sure enough won the contract. And just through, you know, really bringing her vision and her value to her contract, was able to renew that contract the year later with their same customer. And through word of mouth, started delivering these HR services to other large European retailers within the Vancouver airport. So from the get-go, she's an exporter, even though she's doing services in Canada, in the Vancouver airport, because her customers are international retailers. So how does she take it to the next level? Well, by delivering amazing service, she's now been asked by her current customers to offer her services in their US airport locations. So, you know, there you go. It sort of becomes a natural progression of your business, and you can just repeat what you're doing here at home for your customers where they're located outside of Canada. And so I love that because it's sort of a simple approach to growing and expanding your business, following your customers where they are.
Yeah, oftentimes it is organic and it's hyper-logical, and it's the logical next step. So I'm going to surprise the panel with 3 quick turbo rounds. So the first one is, if everyone wants to grab their pens, this is about to become super practical. So all of the organizations or programs that you've leveraged to go faster, or that you work with that you know support entrepreneurs to go faster, let me get started. InnovationCanada.ca. Does everyone know InnovationCanada.ca? Yep. It's literally all the government programs supporting entrepreneurs to innovate and essentially to grow. Fundica, who knows Fundica, has all of the funding resources available from private sector, municipalities, etc. Trade Commissioner Service helps you to scale globally. The Canadian Technology Trade Accelerators, Futurepreneur, Startup Canada, Canadian Chamber of Commerce. These should all be kind of like at the tip of your tongue in organizations that you're part of. Keep it going. Terry.
I wasn't prepared for that at all.
I know.
Start with Peter. He's always
Start with Peter. You stole all the ones I use, but I will tell you, Trade Commissioner Service, we use it every day. I talked to Marcio Franceschini today in Brazil.
Yeah.
Okay, we, BDC and EDC, absolutely. Innovation Canada, absolutely. Trade accelerators, I send my clients to those all the time. And there's some terrific ones. There's some associated with universities. There's some associated with chambers of commerce. We are members of multiple chambers of commerce, and that's been and in more than one country. That has been useful for us in terms of making connections. In terms of actual scaling, though, it really came down to these 2 organizations. Okay? These 2 organizations are what turned it around for us.
Hey, Katrina. You gave us a story of who you didn't work with, but who helped.
So I'll add to that list, maybe some unusual examples, but co-working actually started here in Toronto. So have a look at the co-working, the number of co-working spaces in the city and beyond. They often run incubators and accelerators. I had the privilege of being a mentor for the Make Lemonade Accelerator. One of our participants is over there. So have a look at some of the resources that are available there. And also industry associations. So I think sometimes we think of industry associations as being really stodgy and kind of old school, and they for sure are. But they can also be a really great source of leads, particularly if you're in a service-based business, but even if you're not, looking to get connected with some of those big industry associations can be hugely beneficial.
Let's name a few. So we have the Canadian Association of Family-Owned Enterprises, if you're doing it with a family, Retail Council of Canada, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Canada, all of these types. Here in Toronto, Mars, 111, DMZ, Center for Social Impact. This is your family. Like this is your team, Canada, who wants you to succeed. And if you're from outside of Toronto, the whole regional innovation center system is like absolutely fantastic.
And don't discount the smaller associations as well, right? So the smaller associations can sometimes be hugely beneficial in terms of building those connections. So I've had some of my clients, for example, do really well attending small BOMA events. So if you're in anything with regards to building operations, right, or logistics, that can be another really great one too.
What do you think, Jennifer?
Yeah, so she stole mine, but that's okay because I've got more. I would agree when it comes to international trade, the Trade Commissioner Service is like a gem. They're like my colleagues. Oops, sorry. We work very closely together with the Trade Commissioner Service. If you don't know them, you must. But in terms of other organizations that we at EDC partner with, well, of course, all the certifying bodies. I'm seeing Sylvia over there, so We Be Canada, We Connect International, all the different organizations that are helping companies grow. But the Trade Accelerator Program, I think you might have mentioned that, but now it's grown from just Toronto to across Canada. And that's a program that in a very short amount of time can really help you put together a solid market entry strategy and plan for entering a new market. Phenomenal program, and I think all these partners are part of that program as well. If you don't know the Forum for International Trade Training, EDC partners with them as well, can give you some really good knowledge and skills about international trade, all the ins and outs of selling abroad.
So I'm going to stick in CIFA in there as well.
There you
the
go.
Canadian International Freight Forwarding Association, who competes against FITT sometimes.
Okay, perfect.
Complements, but it competes. Compare the prices.
Yeah, so the point is to leverage and to get really real about it. If you're going to scale, if you're going to be serious about going global, if you're going to be serious about scaling up, then be serious and be part of that ecosystem. Absolutely. And then, of course, multinational companies. We had Ernst & Young as a supporter of the event here today, an excellent company that supports entrepreneurs' organization, and any multinational company. To get into their supply chain, they'll help you to scale.
I would just add, and it was a tactical error not to go first because they used all the examples, but one thing I did just want to add is don't underestimate either peer groups. So we hear a lot of the time from entrepreneurs how lonely it is at the top, and you think you're the only person with the struggles and the sleepless nights because you are fundamentally responsible for all the aspects of the business. But I think the more you connect with like-minded entrepreneurs, the better to bounce challenges off each other, and we hear a lot as well from entrepreneurs that they're reluctant to do that where they might perceive competitors or something. Generally, entrepreneurs will work pretty well with each other. So find those groups, whatever they may be, and there's many of them out there. Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask, I think, too, right? I think that's really the theme that keeps coming up just organically amongst all of us is don't be afraid to ask for those connections. And even if, even beyond a group or a peer group, ask somebody who's ahead of you in your industry or outside of your industry, someone you admire. If you read someone's book, send them a message on LinkedIn. Because people, generally speaking, if they have an entrepreneurial background, if they were an entrepreneur, a founder themselves, right, they're going to, at some point, someone said yes to them. So let them say yes to you.
Entrepreneurs are the most generous people. So are you ready for round two?
Now there's another round.
This is going to be like even more turbo. Here's your challenge, and 50% of the time. What are the biggest mistakes people make in scaling? So when scaling up, what's the biggest mistakes that you've seen? So I'll start with Peter once again. It could be your own mistakes or what you see common.
The biggest mistake. I think it's just not planning, believing, like not realizing that you can. And I think that's something that I want to stress. If you are alone in your living room, in your dining room, or in your one-bedroom apartment trying to develop your business, that's when you start planning for all this stuff and start asking questions. Okay? We've all had the problem of failing by not doing it fast enough. And so in your early stages is when you start. And it's funny, I have talked to people who've had relationships with their lenders, and I know I'm a big fat ad for bureaucratic lending, but they've had relationships long before they actually had a company. And there's many people in here who are helping entrepreneurs right now, not just through the mentoring programs, but just because that is the nature of the beast. Talk to everybody. I have an idea, I'm doing this, I'm at this phase, I have this amount of staff, I want to do this. And so I guess my problem, my criticism or my problem was not starting soon enough.
Start soon enough, fail fast, plan.
Yep.
Know everyone you need to know.
Yep.
Like if you get sick, there's a healthcare system. And if you're starting up, there's an ecosystem. Yep. So use it. Absolutely.
Okay, mine's gonna be really quick. So ask for the damn money. If you need it, ask for it. And if you get a no, ask again. Ask someone else. Ask the question differently. Ask why you didn't get it. Ask how to get it next time. Ask for the damn money.
Ask.
Ask why you didn't get it. Good.
Yeah, for me, I would say it's really, rather than what to do wrong, but to succeed, really know your unique value proposition and what makes you stand out amongst all your competitors, and be able to say it concisely and convincingly.
That's awesome.
For sure, it's not asking for help, be it financing or advice or anything. And I think that often results in uncontrolled growth, because when you start up, you're so focused on getting those customers because you need revenue to do absolutely anything else. But, we see so many entrepreneurs who don't understand, for example, the information that their financial reporting is giving them, and they end up scaling up or growing at all costs, and they end up in situations where products or clients are not profitable to them, but they didn't have the information they needed. And so many people can help with that, and many other aspects of the business. It's so important to ask for help.
It's great. Oftentimes is when companies are scaling, especially when you see SaaS companies, it's often when they have that inflection, they're scaling, that they'll burn out. Mm-hmm. It's at that point they burn out. And that's why having supportive investors around you who have that intelligence on how to scale is so important. So what are the indicators of success of every entrepreneur who scales up successfully? Indicators of success, and I think you can spin this. We'll start with Terry.
For sure, management capabilities is the most important indicator of success. And it doesn't mean, and I'm repeating a little bit, but it doesn't mean that the founder or the CEO of the company has to be capable of doing everything. It's that they have to recognize where they're not. And bring in that support or bring in that help. But if you have a well-rounded management team or group of advisors who can cover off all those things, the company will ultimately get where they want to go.
Okay. I'll spin it in terms of, the indicators of success for growing globally. I think it's really important that you make it a key part of your business strategy, make it central to, the future of your business. I think even having people dedicated towards your export growth, knowing your market and your value proposition, again, are all sort of things that are critical. And just being confident, be confident in yourself and go for it.
Now tables are turned and I'm close to the end and these two still mine. Okay, so I would say have a look at who is in your company, who are making the decisions, and you want to have both a visionary and an implementer. And those don't necessarily need to be individual people, but it's important to have vision and understand where your company is going, where it can go, and also be practical and understand how you're going to be implementing that. It's great to have big dreams, but I think the companies that do well and that ultimately succeed are the ones that can balance those two things, the big vision, the big fiery dream, and how are we going to do this in a practical sense, and how do we plan out that execution.
I think our measure of success is when we have a procedure that works. So we have, and Peter agrees, we have a process that whatever new amount of business comes into it, our process still works to deliver on it. And so it's not really about the income earned, it's just about whatever process we have decided, and through our trial and error, believe me, is working, continues to work. And we can teach that to more people and be more effective that way.
Yeah, process is key, good one too.
Process is everything. So I'm about to open it up for questions, and I know that you're itching to ask some questions. One of the things that we see, there's a group called the Canadian Council of Innovators. It's a group of Canada's top high-growth companies. And across the board, one of the linchpins they say was the most important piece of their success is getting to a point where they aren't part of their companies anymore, so that they can be innovative visionaries, and they're not even part of their company. They're just growing it from the outside in, and then they always attribute that moment to their scale-up story. And for those, and they always say, if I were to do it again, I would build my company without me in it. And that's always impacted me significantly in how I think about investing in companies and starting them up. So what questions do you have to really just juice this panel for the benefit of your business? We'll start over here. Yep. Please introduce yourself as well.
Sure. Peter Rex from Corporate Specialty Services. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for this panel. This has been one of the most insightful and mind-opening panels I have actually experienced at the CGLCC over the past couple of years. Very, very useful in basically causing my mind to basically see real opportunities internally and therefore externally. So thank you very much for this.
It happened here today.
Yes, it did. Okay, so thank you. A couple points and then one question. First of all, I heard earlier about mistakes, and I just want to let you know that Ellen G. Langer, in her book Mindfulness, she said there's no such thing as mistakes. She said there are less effective solutions. And that gives you the freedom to actually do things, and if it doesn't work out, you can keep moving on. So it's a useful mindset to have. It's like, no, that doesn't work out. We're going to keep an eye on it and make changes and make it work. So mistakes is kind of the used word. No, less effective solutions, in my mind, is better.
That's for sure.
Number two, one of the things that many people have commented on a very macro level is productivity. And I didn't hear that word used in this panel discussion, and I think there's an opportunity left out. Because I'm looking at this, and scaling up to me is not just preparing for growth, but also taking a difference between growth of hiring more people and rather increasing productivity so you're getting more output from the same existing people. It's a really powerful tool to use, and it wasn't here, but I really wish it was, because that's, I think, is a really powerful way of looking at this, particularly from a macro level.
That's awesome. Thanks for talking about productivity. Is that your last comment before I let
No, one more question. But this is for Miss Miss Mann. One of the questions I had, and one of my misperceptions, and I really wish you can fill out this in for me, is what is the cutoff level floor for businesses approaching your organization for services?
For services specifically?
Well, for service or finance. It's sort of like, you know what, if you're below this level, we're not really able to help you. So, but if you are above this level, kind of like, we are better positioned to help you.
Sure. So the answer is there isn't one. See, I made him happy. No, there isn't one. And we've actually done a lot of work in the last couple of years on developing products and services that are specifically targeted to entrepreneurs at different stages. So, you know, we will certainly work with startup businesses in terms of financing, and then right through their growth journey, depending on where they are, both in our financing and our advisory services group. So.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Before we open it up to the next question, any comments on productivity?
Yes.
I thought that was a really insightful comment, so thanks for sharing that. And of course, incremental failure versus like existential failure, you know, and not thinking that every incremental failure is an existential failure, which will just put you into the grave early. So.
Can I jump into the productivity one? So I'm a productivity hacker, and shameless plug for my own business. To give you an idea, I took email off of my phone because my assistant, my Up-Level Solutions virtual assistant, checks my email for me. There are a whole bunch of things that I think, as a founder, when you start to change, when you start to scale up your business, when you look at growth, you have to think, okay, what is it worth my time to be doing, right? And for me, it's worth my time to be coming to conferences like this. But in order to do this, I had to figure out all of the other shit, basically, that didn't need to be done by me, or even things I loved doing that needed to be done by other people on my team. And I think some of the hard lessons that I've learned in my own company, but also that we see with a lot of our clients who are then offloading their administrative work to us, is that you also want to be smart about how you're delegating things too, right? So productivity, you want to look at yourself, and you want to look at yourself as a founder and the things that you shouldn't be doing that someone else should do, but you also want to look at how can you optimize what the rest of your team is doing, and are we using the right systems? Do we have the processes in place for efficiency? And also, are we doing things as we grow that we shouldn't be doing at all anymore, right? So we were working with an e-commerce company who was still writing like handwritten notes to their customers, which is really lovely when you have 10 orders a day to process. When you have 100, for one thing, no one knew who this person was who was signing them.
So I think looking at productivity first from a what can I remove, secondly, what can I look at creating better systems for, and then also, am I the person or is the person on the team who's working on this, are they the most effective person, the most cost-efficient person to be doing this?
Absolutely, and what we see is when companies scale, they expand and contract. You need certain talent for certain times, but sometimes you're just going to lay off 40% of your staff, and that's part of your scaling strategy to focus. And we see that movement with most companies. Another question over here, I think? No? Yeah.
Are we surprised?
Please introduce yourself.
Everybody knows me by now. Sophia Stone, Indie Group. I have a question along the lines of certification, since we're here. There's been a lot of talk. There was a Lisbeth article on the BDC Women in Tech fund. And there's a lot of tech around there's a lot of conversation around access to funding and whether or not people are who they say they are, whether they're owning and operating. First of all, shout out to Victoria, who actually brings in the CGLCC and who gets us involved in Startup Can stuff. I'll see you next week. But is there kind of a plan to incorporate that to ensure that we who've gone through this certification process are going to be represented and given kind of support ahead of folks who may be owned by a woman but not operated, who may have an executive member but who it's not owned and operated? Like, how are we planning to better ensure that certification, since this is a certification conference, is being used?
Would you like to take that?
Sure, yeah, I can take it, but I don't really have an answer, to be quite candid with you. You know, I think it's a very important discussion, and we have been doing a lot of work on, looking at different ways to bring services and financing to different groups and make sure that it's accessible for all as it can be, and that groups, and you referenced our Women in Tech Fund as an example. That is one we have targeted specifically. We hear a lot from groups that they're not necessarily looking for different products and services, but the way that they are brought to those groups needs to change and needs to adjust. So the conversation is happening, and the discussions, I think we have a lot of the right people around the table, but I don't have an easy answer for you, really.
So unfortunately, we don't have any time, but the panelists will be available afterwards for some questions. We'll just leave you with this around scaling, I think. Thank you to the panel. That was amazing. You talked through productivity failures, looking at mistakes, indicators of success, when's the right time, the difference between growing and scaling. But we started with network with Peter, and we'll finish with network too. When it comes to supplier diversity schemes, when it comes to certifications, when it comes to the ecosystem, it really is a system, and it's a system composed of incredible humans and people who share values, who have ideas. And so whatever you want the ecosystem to be, if you want to see more proactive certification programs, you help to make that happen. And so if you want to see a more responsive certification program, you paid for the certification. Essentially say, I want to see more value for the certification, and it's on the onus of the certification provider. The ecosystem is only there to serve entrepreneurs. We're only here to serve entrepreneurs. So it's part of your opportunity to help share your views and how the ecosystem can evolve and help you to scale faster. And if you see a gap in support, whether it's financing, advisory, service, global market access, or certification, the onus is on you to talk to those organizations, say, I need this support, because we will only want to help you to grow. So thank you so much again to the panel. Thank you so much to Rashad for putting together the panel, and to Daryl for this wonderful opportunity.
Yes, I think so, yeah. Make our exit.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you so much,
Peter,
for this very useful and very relevant discussion. I think it was really great. Thank you as well to BDC for presenting this session. Now let's move to the last set of concurrent sessions of the program for the corporate stream that will take place in the Austin Gallery on the 12th floor. The session will be examining how to measure the impact of diversity and inclusion on productivity and profitability. For suppliers, we have the final industry specific session focusing on those in the tech sector. It's taking place in the Melinda Gallery on the 3rd floor. And taking place in this room, there will be a discussion on risk management and how to protect your business. As a reminder, the silent auction table is going to close in about 5 minutes max, if not 2 minutes. So if you haven't done so yet, please, and if you're interested by any one of the items on the table, please do it now. And the sessions will actually start in 5 minutes, so you just have time to go to either the Melinda room, the Austin Gallery, or you just stay here. Okay, thank you.